In 1924, a farm boy of 9 could milk 6 cows, haul 40 pounds of water, and split a morning's kindling before the rest of the country had rolled over in bed. There were no snooze buttons, no cereal boxes, no school bus idling at the curb. There was only the cold, the dark, and a list of tasks the whole homestead depended on. Number 18 on this list was so dangerous that rural families lost children to it nearly every winter. And number 3 vanished so completely that most Americans alive today have never even heard the word for it. These weren't chores the way we mean the word now. They were survival, parceled out to small hands because every hand counted. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, because what these kids did before sunrise will change how you see your own mornings. Let's count down, starting with number 25. Number 25. Sweeping the dooryard and the porch steps was the first small duty handed to the youngest child, often before they were tall enough to reach a cow's flank. With a stiff broom of broom corn lashed to a hickory handle, they cleared the packed dirt yard of straw, chicken droppings, and the mud tracked in overnight. It seemed like nothing, a chore for the smallest, yet a clean dooryard was a matter of pride in an era when neighbors judged a family by its order. Oral histories from the Midwest recall children sweeping in the gray half-light, breath fogging, the broom whispering against frozen ground. The work taught them early that the farm noticed everything, that nothing was beneath attention. When concrete walks and indoor living arrived, the swept dirt yard faded, and with it a daily ritual that once marked the boundary between wilderness and home. Number 24. Carrying out the ashes from the cook stove and the parlor heater was a filthy, choking job nobody wanted, which is exactly why it landed on a child. Each morning, the cold gray ash had to be shoveled into a metal hod and hauled outside before a new fire could be laid, the dust rising in clouds that coated hair and stung the eyes. Yet nothing was wasted. The ashes were saved in a barrel, destined for the garden, the outhouse, or the soap-making come spring. A careless child who dumped live coals onto a wooden porch could burn the whole place down. And more than one farm was lost exactly that way. Diaries from the period speak of small hands blackened to the wrist before sunup. It was thankless, sooty, and essential, the unglamorous foundation on which the warm kitchen was built. Number 23. Filling the kindling box fell to children who learned the difference between wood that would catch and wood that would only smolder. They gathered pine knots, dry corn cobs, and slivers of fat wood, splitting them small with a hatchet whose handle was often taller than they were. The box beside the stove had to be heaped full each morning so the fire could be revived without delay. A poorly filled box meant a cold kitchen and a scolding, since breakfast for 6 could not be cooked over green wood. Children learned to read a woodpile the way a reader reads a page, knowing which split would spit, which would burn slow and steady. The smell of resin on their hands lingered all day. When gas ranges and electric stoves arrived, the kindling box emptied for good, and a whole vocabulary of firecraft slipped quietly out of American childhood. Number 22. Sharpening and oiling the tools was a quiet morning duty that revealed how seriously a farm took its own survival. Before the heavy work of the day, a child might be set to the grindstone, turning the crank, while an older hand pressed a scythe or an axe to the wet wheel, the stone hissing and throwing a fine spray. Harness leather was rubbed with neat's foot oil to keep it from cracking, and hinges were greased so no gate squealed. A dull tool meant a wasted day and a tired animal. By the 1920s, a good scythe blade cost real money, and a family that let its edges rust was a family courting ruin. Oral histories recall the rhythmic creak of the grindstone in the dark barn. The lesson was plain. Tools were trusted partners, and a child who cared for them was learning to care for everything. Number 21. Bedding the stalls with fresh straw came before the animals could be brought in or fed, a chore that demanded a strong back from a small body. Children forked clean straw across the plank floors of the horse stalls and the cow byre, building a dry layer that would keep the stock warm through the day and protect their hooves and joints. Good bedding meant healthy animals, and healthy animals meant a working farm. The straw came from the previous harvest, every stalk accounted for, nothing bought that could be grown. Diaries from Iowa and Nebraska recall the satisfying scratch of the fork and the sweet, dusty smell of clean straw in a cold barn. It was heavy, repetitive work, but it taught a child that comfort, even an animal's comfort, had to be made by hand each and every morning, never simply assumed. Number 20. Mucking out the stalls was the dark twin of bedding them, the job of clearing away the soiled straw and manure that piled up overnight. With a fork and a wheelbarrow, children hauled the steaming load to the manure pile behind the barn, where it would rot down into the fertilizer that fed next year's corn. The smell was overpowering in the closed warmth of the barn, and the work left arms aching before breakfast. Yet that pile was treasure. By the 1920s, commercial fertilizer was a luxury most families could not afford, so every barrowful of manure was money spread across the fields. Oral histories recall children counting loads to pass the time, racing the sunrise. It was the least glamorous chore on any farm, and the one that most plainly taught that even waste, handled right, became wealth in the patient economy of the land. Number 19. Trimming and filling the kerosene lamps was delicate work entrusted to careful hands, usually a daughter old enough to be trusted near flame and glass. Each morning the lamps had to be refilled from the kerosene can, the wicks trimmed straight with scissors so they would burn clean and even, and the glass chimneys polished free of soot with a twist of newspaper. A poorly trimmed wick smoked and blackened the chimney within minutes, dimming the whole room. Before rural electrification reached most American farms in the late 1930s, these lamps were the only light a family had, and a clean burning lamp was the difference between reading and darkness. Children learned that a wisp of cotton and a careful hand controlled the evening itself. When the electric bulb arrived, the chore vanished overnight, taking with it a small daily intimacy with fire that no switch could replace. Number 18. Breaking the ice on the stock tank was the most dangerous chore of the winter morning, and the one that took children's lives with grim regularity. The horses, cows, and hogs could not drink through a frozen trough, so a child was sent out with an axe or a heavy maul to shatter the crust that formed overnight. On the worst mornings, the ice was inches thick, and the work demanded that a small body lean far over the cold water in the dark. Children slipped, fell through pond ice on the same errand, or were caught in the brutal cold too long. Every rural county kept its own quiet memory of a winter loss. Yet stock that could not drink would not survive, so the chore could never be skipped. It was a stark daily reminder that the line between duty and danger on a farm was thin as new ice. Number 17. Grinding and shelling. Corn for feed put children to work at the hand-cranked sheller and grinder before the animals were fed. Dried ears from the corn crib were fed into the sheller, which stripped the kernels from the cob with a satisfying clatter, and those kernels were then ground coarse for the chickens or the hogs. It was monotonous, arm-burning work, the crank turning 1,000 times before enough was ground for a morning's feeding. Yet a farm lived or died on its corn, the golden currency of the American Midwest, and processing it was a daily necessity. Oral histories recall the steady rasp of the grinder and the cob saved in a basket to feed the cook stove fire. Nothing was thrown away. The chore taught children patience and the plain arithmetic of the farm, where one task fed the next in an unbroken chain from crib to trough to table. Number 16. Slopping the hogs sent children out with heavy buckets of kitchen scraps, sour milk, and ground feed to the pen, where the animals waited with an impatience that could knock a small child flat. The slop was a stew of everything the household could not eat, table scraps and potato peelings, and the whey left from cheesemaking poured into the trough while the hogs shoved and squealed. A fattening hog was the family's winter meat and a good part of its cash income, so feeding them well was no small matter. By the 1920s, a single well-raised hog could be worth more than a month of a hired man's wages. Children learned to respect the animal's size and strength, to climb the rail rather than wade in. The smell clung to their clothes all day, a badge of a chore that turned the household's waste directly into the next year's bacon. Number 15, scattering scratch for the chickens was a chore often given to the youngest girl, who walked among the flock at first light, flinging handfuls of cracked corn across the yard. The hens came running in a flurry of feathers, and the scattering had to be. Even so, the timid birds at the edges got their share. A well-fed flock laid well, and eggs were the steady small income that bought sugar, coffee, and thread. By the 1920s, a dozen eggs traded at the country store for around 30 cents, and a good flock could clothe the children for a season. Oral histories recall the comfort of this gentle chore, the warmth of birds crowding close, a soft beginning to a hard day. It was one of the few morning duties remembered with fondness, the rare task where the work felt less like labor and more like keeping company. Number 14, feeding and watering the horses and mules came before any human breakfast, because the animals that pulled the plow had to be fueled before the field work began. Children measured out oats and hay, forked it into the mangers, and hauled bucket after bucket of water to the stalls, learning the temperament of each animal by heart. A draft horse was the engine of the entire farm, worth more than almost anything the family owned, and a poorly fed team meant a poorly worked field. Diaries from the era record children rising in pitch dark to tend animals that towered over them, speaking softly to keep them calm. The bond was real. A child who fed a team every morning came to know it like a sibling. When tractors replaced horses on American farms, this daily companionship dissolved, and a relationship between child and animal as old as farming itself quietly ended. Number 13. Opening the barn and letting the stock out was a chore of timing and judgment beyond the years of the child who performed it. On mild mornings, the cattle and horses were turned out to pasture after feeding, and a child had to swing the heavy gates, count the animals, and watch that none bolted or strayed toward the road. A single cow loose in a neighbor's corn could mean a quarrel that lasted years. The work required a child to read the weather, the animals' moods, and the condition of the fences all at once. Oral histories recall the thunder of hooves in the gray dawn as the herd streamed toward the open field. It was a small daily exercise in responsibility, the farm trusting a child to manage creatures 10 times their weight, and most children rose to it without ever quite realizing what was being asked. Number 12, bringing in the cows from the night pasture sent children walking the dewy fields at first light, often barefoot in summer, to fetch the herd home for milking. The cows knew the routine and usually drifted toward the gate on their own, but a child had to find the stragglers, coax the slow ones, and guide the whole line down the lane to the barn. It was a long walk through wet grass in the cold, sometimes a mile or more, with only a dog for company. Diaries from the rural South and Midwest recall the peace of those walks, the world silent but for bird song and the soft tread of the herd. It was solitary and slow, a chore that gave a child the rare gift of being alone with their thoughts before a day of unceasing labor, watching the sun climb over a waking farm. Number 11, skimming the cream and running the separator turned raw milk into the farm's most reliable cash. After milking, the milk had to be processed quickly before it soured, and children cranked the hand separator, a whirling machine that spun the cream from the skim by sheer centrifugal force. The crank had to turn at a steady speed, not too fast and never too slow, or the separation failed and good cream was lost. The cream was saved for market or churning. The skim went to the hogs and calves. By the 1920s, the cream check from the local creamery was often a family's only steady money, the difference between getting by and going under. Oral histories recall the high whine of the separator filling the kitchen each morning. It was a chore that put real economic power in a child's hands, and they felt the weight of it. Number 10. Churning butter was the long, arm-numbing chore that turned the morning's cream into something the family could eat or sell. Children worked the dasher up and down in the tall wooden churn or turned the crank of a barrel churn, sometimes for 40 minutes or more before the butter finally broke. There was no rushing it. The cream had to be just the right temperature, and a child who quit too soon had nothing to show but tired arms. Once the butter came, it was washed, worked, and salted, then pressed into molds, stamped with the family's own pattern, a small mark of pride carried to the country store. By the 1920s, good farm butter fetched a fair price, and a reputation for it followed a family for miles. The rhythmic slosh of the churn was the sound of patience itself, a lesson in the reward that comes only to those who keep going. Number 9. Carrying in coal and wood kept the home's fires alive, a chore measured in countless trips between the wood pile and the stove. Children hauled split wood in their arms and coal in heavy hods, stacking it by the kitchen range and the heating stove so the fires never went hungry through the day. On a bitter morning, the household burned through fuel fast, and a child might make a dozen cold trips before the work was done. The wood pile itself was a family's insurance against winter, and its size was watched with quiet anxiety as the cold months wore on. Oral histories recall the ache of frozen fingers and the splinters that came with the territory. It was relentless, repetitive labor, but it kept the family warm and the food cooking, and a child learned that comfort was something carried in, load by load, never simply turned on. Number 8. Pumping and priming the well was the gateway to every other water chore, and it required both strength and know-how. On cold mornings, the hand pump often lost its prime overnight, and a child had to pour in a cup of saved water and work the handle hard until the suction caught and the water gushed. In freezing weather, the spout iced over and had to be thawed. The whole farm's water passed through that single iron pump for the house, the stock, the washing, and everything else. By the 1920s, a deep well with a good pump was a treasured asset, and its care fell often to the children. Diaries recall small bodies throwing their whole weight onto the pump handle in the dark. It was the unsung first step of the day, the chore that made every other chore possible, drawn one heavy stroke at a time from the cold ground. Number 7. Checking the trapline was the chore that turned farm boys into early risers all their own, slipping out before dawn to walk a circuit of traps set along the creek and fence rows. A boy with a good line might catch muskrat, mink, or raccoon, and the cured pelts brought real cash from the fur buyer who came through each season. In the 1920s, a single good mink pelt could be worth several dollars, a fortune to a child, and the money was often a boy's only spending money of the year. The work demanded the child be out and back before school in all weather, walking miles in the dark. Oral histories recall the thrill of the line and the pride of the first sale. It taught self-reliance and the workings of money in a way no classroom could. A small business run before breakfast by a child alone in the cold. Number 6. Salting the stock and forking hay was the winter morning duty that kept the animals alive through the months when no grass grew. Children carried blocks of salt to the troughs and forked hay from the loft down to the cattle, climbing into the cold, dark mow where the dust hung thick. Salt kept the animals healthy and drinking. Hay was the harvest of the previous summer, every bale a memory of sweat in the July sun. A family that ran short of hay before spring faced a grim choice between selling stock cheap or watching it suffer. By the 1920s, judging how much hay a herd needed to last the winter was a skill of survival, and children absorbed it by doing. The soft thud of hay landing in the manger and the patient chewing that followed were the quiet sounds of a farm holding steady against the season. Number 5. Gathering the eggs sent children into the hen house at first light to reach beneath warm, sometimes unwilling hens and collect the morning's lay. It sounds gentle, and often it was, but a broody hen could peck hard, and eggs had to be handled like glass, carried in an apron or a basket without a single crack. Every EGG counted. By the 1920s, egg money was traditionally the woman and children's own income, traded at the store for the small comforts a cash-poor farm could rarely buy outright. A child who broke eggs through carelessness was costing the family real money. Oral histories recall the warm, musty smell of the hen house and the satisfaction of a full basket. It was a chore of patience and care, one of the first that taught a child their small daily work added up, egg by egg, to something the whole family relied on. Number 4. Hauling water to the house was the heavy, endless chore that filled the reservoirs, the wash boilers, and the drinking pails bucket by bucket from the well or the spring. Before indoor plumbing reached the American farm, every drop a family used had to be carried by hand, and a household of 6 might need dozens of gallons before noon. Children made trip after trip, the full pails dragging at their arms and slopping cold water down their legs in the frost. The cook stove reservoir alone, a tank built into the side of the range, swallowed gallons to keep warm water always ready. Diaries from the era record the sheer relentlessness of it. Water for cooking, washing, scrubbing, and stock, never enough, always more to fetch. When the pipe and the faucet finally arrived, no modern convenience was more deeply felt, for none had cost so many small backs so much. Number 3. Cooling the milk in the springhouse was the forgotten chore at the heart of the dairy farm, a word and a way of life most Americans today have never encountered. Before refrigeration, families built a small stone springhouse over a flowing spring, where the cold water ran constantly through troughs that held crocks of milk, butter, and cream. Each morning a child carried the fresh milk down to the springhouse, set it in the icy current, and brought up the cooled crocks and the cream ready for market. The flowing water kept everything fresh in the days before the icebox, let alone the refrigerator. Oral histories recall the deep chill of the springhouse and the green smell of moss and stone. It was a daily ritual that connected the family directly to the water under their land. When electricity and the refrigerator arrived, the springhouse fell silent, and a quiet, ingenious corner of American life vanished entirely. Number 2. Building the morning fire was the chore on which the entire household turned, the first task of the day and the one that woke the home itself. Long before light, a child or a mother crept to the cold kitchen, raked back the ashes to find any live coals banked the night before, and coaxed them back to flame with kindling and breath. If the coals had died, the fire had to be started from scratch with match and patience, and on the hardest mornings, a neighbor's live coal might be borrowed and carried home. Nothing happened until the stove was hot. No coffee, no breakfast, no warmth for the others to rise into. By the 1920s, this skill was so fundamental that children mastered it almost before they could read. The first crackle of the morning fire was the sound of the day beginning, the small daily miracle that turned a frozen house back into a home. Number 1. Milking the cows was the chore above all others, the iron ritual that defined farm childhood and could never, ever be skipped. Twice a day, every single day of the year, the cows had to be milked, and a child of 7 or 8 was expected to take their place on the 3-legged stool in the cold, dark barn, forehead pressed to a warm flank, hands working in the steady rhythm that filled the pail with foaming milk. There were no holidays, no sick days, no sleeping in. A cow left unmilked grew sick and stopped giving. By the 1920s, the milk and cream from the herd were often the farm's most dependable income, and the chore fell hardest on the children. Oral histories recall frozen fingers, the warmth of the cow, and the hiss of milk against tin in the silence before dawn. It was the heartbeat of the farm, the one duty that bound a child to the land more tightly than any other, repeated thousands of times until it became as natural as breathing. These 25 chores were the unwritten curriculum of American childhood 100 years ago, taught not in schoolrooms, but in cold barns and dark kitchens before the sun came up. They built children who knew how to keep a family alive, and they vanished almost entirely within a single generation, swept away by electricity, plumbing, and the tractor. Which of these would you have lasted a single morning doing? Tell me in the comments, and ask the oldest person you know if they remember any of them, because the answers might surprise you.